Hello students, this is Mrs. Denton. If you're watching this video, then you're preparing for the Geometry SOL. I've got a series of SOL review study guides that we can work through together. This first study guide belongs to SOL G.1. G.1 is the SOL pertaining to logical reasoning, and as you can see, there are 4 different topics within this SOL. Let's see what kind of review we need to talk about before we begin. One part of logical reasoning has to do with conditional statements. A conditional statement is symbolized with the letters P and Q. There's an arrow in between them, and that arrow means if the hypothesis occurs, then the conclusion occurs. P represents the hypothesis, Q represents the conclusion. To manipulate that conditional statement, you could perform something called the converse. The converse switches the hypothesis and conclusion. The symbols would say Q to P. The inverse is another way to manipulate the conditional statement. The inverse's job is to negate the hypothesis and conclusion. However, it does not switch the order. The squiggle is the symbol that we use as the negation symbol. And finally, there's the contrapositive. The contrapositive smushes the converse and the inverse together. The contrapositive switches the order and negates the hypothesis and conclusion. The symbols would be the negation of Q to the negation of P. Now, there's a very special conditional statement called a biconditional. The biconditional symbolism looks like this: P and Q with a double-sided arrow between them. There's a very special time when you can form a biconditional statement, and that's when the conditional and the converse are both true. When using the biconditional statement, we use this symbolism to show that we could read the statement forward as the conditional statement, or we could read it backwards as the converse statement. There's a very special phrase that belongs to the biconditional statement, and that's the phrase, if and only if. You'll see that phrase pop up when you're reading a biconditional statement. Some other things we need to note are the logic symbols. Over here I've got a list of 6 different symbols that show up that we need to translate. The symbol with the upward facing arrow stands for the word and. The downward facing arrow stands for the word or. These are 2 words that create compound statements. We've already talked about the job of the arrow. Look over here at our conditional statements. Each arrow in the conditional statement forms a phrase if, comma, then. The double-sided arrow here stands for the phrase if and only if. That can be abbreviated as IFF, if and only if. The 3 dots in the shape of a triangle translate to the word therefore. And the squiggle, that didn't print too well. And the squiggle is the sign for negation, often translated with the word not. Okay, a couple other things for us to review briefly are what's up with Venn diagrams here. This type of Venn diagram is often referred to as the sometimes Venn diagram, where you have a zone that's overlapped. This zone in the middle represents the and zone. This zone is shown as the and zone because it is part of both circles. The or zone is much bigger. The or zone is the entire Venn diagram, the zones of independence as well as the overlapping zone. The or zone is the sum of all parts. The final two things we want to refresh before we begin practicing are the laws of deductive reasoning. There are two laws of deductive reasoning. One, called the law of the detachment. Within this law, you can see that we start with a conditional statement. Statement number 2 that's given should refer to whatever the hypothesis was of the conditional statement. If all of these parts are true, then it is logical that we can form a new statement about the original conclusion. The law of syllogism seems more involved. The law of syllogism has 3 different conditional statements. What needs to be noted is the conclusion of the first statement is repeated as the hypothesis of the second statement. It kind of acts like a link. Here, the Q links together the original hypothesis with the second sentence's conclusion. I hope that was a good refresher in the 4 parts of conditional statements. In the next video, in the 4 parts of logical reasoning, in the next video we'll do some practice.